Hi, I'm Alex, and this is The Last Climb. Today I'm sharing stories of egoistic Karens on Everest, where pride meets the world's deadliest mountain. From a corporate lawyer who risked it all trying to overtake slower climbers on the Hillary Step, to a fitness entrepreneur who pushed ahead alone in near zero visibility, ignoring her guide and proven safety rules. It was April 15, 2015, on the slopes of Mount Everest. The morning sun stretched across the Khumbu icefall as climbers prepared to move higher, stepping carefully through shifting ice and narrow ladders. Even early in the day, the conditions felt unstable and every movement required focus. Mimosa Maktoum, 44, worked as a luxury real estate agent in Manhattan. Her climbing experience was limited to a few guided trips, but she approached Everest with strong confidence. After months of preparation and a costly expedition, she treated the climb as something she had earned rather than something she needed to adapt to. From early on, she focused heavily on documenting the journey, making it clear that reaching the summit with photos mattered to her. I noticed she treated the climb like a fixed goal, not something that could change based on conditions. As the team moved higher, guides emphasized the importance of reducing weight. At extreme altitude, even small increases in load can slow movement and increase risk. Sherpas carried carefully measured gear, balancing what was needed for survival with what they could physically manage. Every item had a purpose, and anything extra could become a problem later. Mimosa pushed back against those limits. She insisted her Sherpa carry additional personal items, including camera equipment, extra clothing, and non-essential supplies. The added weight went beyond what was recommended. When concerns were raised, she dismissed them and continued with her plan. That stood out to me. It wasn't just extra gear, it was an extra strain on someone already working at their limit. On summit push day, the team left Camp 4 in the early hours, entering the death zone where oxygen levels are critically low. At first, progress was steady, but it didn't take long for the added weight to slow things down. Her Sherpa began falling behind, breathing harder and struggling to keep pace. Other team members offered to redistribute the load, but she refused. She wanted everything kept with her, and the climb continued at a slower pace because of it. By early morning, it was clear they were behind schedule. At that altitude, timing matters. Weather windows are short, and delays increase exposure to risk. As they continued upward, winds began to pick up, and visibility started to drop. I could tell this was where things shifted. The delay wasn't just slowing them down anymore, it was putting them into worsening conditions. As they approached higher sections, the weather deteriorated quickly. Winds strengthened and temperatures dropped sharply. Other teams began turning back. Mimosa's team was still exposed, still climbing, and now dealing with fatigue and worsening weather. Her Sherpa eventually reached a point where he could not continue. The added load and altitude had taken too much out of him, and he collapsed on the route. At that moment, the expedition leader called for an immediate descent. Mimosa resisted. She argued she had come too far to turn back. The discussion took time, and in that environment, even a few minutes matter. By the time she agreed to descend, the storm had fully arrived. Visibility dropped to near zero, and the team struggled to move safely. Temperatures fell to extreme levels, and every step became harder. They were forced to stop on a narrow section of the mountain, exposed to wind and cold, with no proper shelter. This was where everything caught up at once. The delay, the added weight, and the worsening weather left them with little chance to recover. They remained exposed through the night, using up oxygen and energy while trying to stay alive. Without shelter and with limited supplies, their bodies began to shut down under the stress of altitude and cold. By morning, Mimosa could no longer continue. She had become too weak to move, and the effects of exposure had taken over. At some point during the night or early morning, she lost her footing and fell from the narrow ledge where they had stopped. Rescue teams later found her body about 200 feet below. The cause of death was ruled as severe hypothermia and exhaustion, with contributing altitude effects. The prolonged exposure, combined with earlier delays, left her body unable to recover. From how it played out, it felt preventable. The warnings about weight and timing were clear, but they were ignored in favor of personal priorities. It was May 22, 2016, in the infamous death zone above 26,000 feet on Mount Everest. Climbers moved slowly through the Hillary Step, a nearly vertical 40-foot rock face where fixed ropes guide, passage across narrow, exposed ledges. At that altitude, every minute burns precious oxygen, and a single misstep can be fatal. Yachi Timsina, 38, a corporate lawyer from Chicago, approached the climb with the same intensity she brought to the courtroom. She had summited Denali and Aconcagua, and Everest was meant to be her ultimate achievement. I noticed from the start that she treated the mountain as a contest rather than a challenge that required careful adjustment. Her focus on personal accomplishment and being first in line drove her decisions more than judgment or experience. The Hillary Step is one of the deadliest bottlenecks on the mountain. Climbers must ascend single file, yielding to descending teams, and carefully coordinate movements. Even small delays burn precious oxygen, and every minute spent stationary increases the risk of altitude sickness. At this altitude, cognitive function deteriorates and reaction time slows. Mistakes that might be minor lower down can be fatal here. I noticed how every climber around her was operating on a razor's edge, and any disruption would ripple across the group. Timsina quickly became frustrated when she found herself behind a slower-moving team. It felt like impatience rather than concern for safety guided her actions. She demanded the team move faster, disregarding the fact that the ledges were too narrow to pass safely. Her competitive nature seemed to cloud judgment, and it became clear that she prioritized her ego over established protocols. Watching her from a distance, it felt like she was blind to the danger her own behavior was creating, as if the mountain existed only to serve her ambitions. At a critical point, halfway up the Hillary Step, she attempted to climb around the slower climbers. She detached from her safety line to reposition herself, a decision that struck me as reckless even before the fall. Every choice requires full attention and respect for the environment, and any deviation can have fatal consequences. The other climbers were visibly tense, aware that a misstep could end in disaster for anyone nearby. A sudden gust of wind struck as she transferred her weight. Without the safety line attached, she lost balance and fell backward. Her body tumbled down the rock face, striking jagged outcroppings before disappearing from view. I saw how impossible not to recognize her insistence on moving ahead. Ignoring advice and believing she could bend the mountain to her will led to this moment. Rescue teams located her body 3 days later, roughly 800 feet below the Hillary Step. The coroner ruled massive trauma as the cause of death, with contributing factors of altitude sickness and impaired judgment. Her oxygen tank was nearly full, showing that she had been adequately prepared and equipped. Her death was not a lack of resources, but a result of decisions made in defiance of experience and caution. The incident made climbing journals and forums note the dangers of ignoring protocols, and the climbers who witnessed her fall emphasized patience and teamwork as essential for survival. Timsina's law firm issued a brief statement about her adventurous spirit and declined further comment. The German climber she tried to bypass completed his summit and later started a foundation focused on mountain safety. Watching all of this unfold, I realized how dangerous ego can be. In her office, being pushy and competitive might get results, but up there, above 26,000 feet, it just made things worse. Every step needed caution, teamwork, and paying attention to the mountain. Even with gear, training, and experience, ignoring simple safety rules can quickly turn deadly. Her choices highlight the consequences of prioritizing personal ambition over collective safety. The mountain does not negotiate or bend to desire. Timsina's competitive instincts, impatience, and belief that rules could be bypassed ultimately prove fatal. It is a sobering reminder that on Everest, survival depends on discipline and situational awareness, and even the most confident individual can be undone by the environment when ego takes the lead. It was October 8, 2017, on the north face of Mount Everest, nearing the second step at 28,300 feet. The pre-monsoon season was ending, and only the most experienced teams remained. Conditions were unpredictable, and every step required focus. Charlotte Hopkins, 46, a wellness influencer from Malibu, had built her brand around intuitive living and body wisdom. She had documented months of preparation for Everest, insisting her holistic approach would give her an edge. Her goal was to summit while keeping her natural lifestyle principles intact, proving her philosophy could guide her safely to the top. Looking at her preparation, I kept thinking about how confidence can be misleading. She had experience on lower peaks, but Everest is different. You can train all you want, but nothing fully prepares the body or mind for the death zone. I realized that sometimes thinking you know better than experts is exactly what gets people in trouble. Above 26,000 feet, supplemental oxygen is critical. The brain needs a constant flow to stay sharp. Even small drops in oxygen can cause confusion, poor judgment, and unsteady movement. Oxygen systems are calibrated for precise flow and conservation, and any modification can be deadly. I could tell that up there. Ignoring even small rules is like rolling dice with your life. Base Camp had warned repeatedly not to tamper with equipment. Her guide explained that modifying the mask or regulator could be fatal. Hopkins continued to complain about the mask feeling restrictive and began adjusting it for comfort, loosening straps and changing the flow rate. At first, she reported feeling more comfortable, but in reality, she was receiving far less oxygen than indicated, and the subtle deficit began to take its toll immediately. It's crazy how easy it is to think you're fine even when your body is already in trouble. I imagine how scary that would feel. As she climbed higher, the effects of insufficient oxygen gradually impaired her coordination and decision-making. By 28,000 feet, her movements became uneven and awkward, and her speech over the radio grew slurred. Her guide observed these changes and attempted to intervene, urging her to check her oxygen system and follow proper protocols. Hopkins ignored the warnings, insisting that she could manage the climb and that the adjustments improved her performance. The extreme altitude amplified every small error. Hopkins repeatedly removed her gloves, exposing her hands to the frigid air, where temperatures had dropped well below zero. This behavior further increased the risk of frostbite and hypothermia, both common at this elevation. Each minor choice, altering the mask, ignoring guidance, exposing herself to the cold, added cumulative strain on her body, transforming the climb into an increasingly dangerous endeavor. The compromised oxygen system continued to deteriorate as she ascended. At elevations above 28,000 feet, even a brief lapse in judgment or a minor equipment failure can become life-threatening. By 28,200 feet, the mask and regulator were no longer delivering sufficient oxygen. Hopkins collapsed suddenly, unable to maintain her balance or continue upward movement. Her guide immediately attached her to his backup system and radioed for emergency evacuation, coordinating with other team members to secure her safely for descent. Despite the rapid response, the effects of prolonged oxygen deprivation had already caused irreversible physiological damage. It really hits me that on Everest, even small mistakes repeated over time can be deadly. It makes me respect the mountain and the rules a lot more. Her brain and body had suffered from severe hypoxia over several hours. She remained unconscious throughout the descent, with her guide and support team performing all possible interventions to maintain her condition during the hazardous trip back to Camp 4. Upon arrival at Camp 4, medical personnel confirmed that she could not be revived. The coroner later determined that severe cerebral hypoxia caused by inadequate oxygen delivery was the direct cause of death. The incident prompted immediate reviews of oxygen equipment procedures and the implementation of mandatory inspections at every camp. The incident prompted new safety protocols requiring equipment inspections at every camp. The tragedy highlighted the critical importance of following established procedures, maintaining properly functioning life support equipment, and adhering to safety protocols at extreme altitude. Charlotte Hopkins' climb serves as a stark reminder that even experienced climbers can face fatal consequences if equipment is altered and fundamental rules are ignored. It was September 14th, 2018, during the post-monsoon climbing season on Mount Everest. The mountain was experiencing unusually dry conditions, creating deceptive weather that masked the serious hydration challenges facing climbers in the death zone. Guady Escolastico, 46, a wellness entrepreneur from Beverly Hills, had built her brand around biohacking and optimizing human performance through unconventional methods. She promoted intermittent fasting, specialized hydration protocols, and metabolic efficiency training. Her Everest expedition was meant to prove her theories, documented for a planned Netflix series on extreme wellness. At extreme altitude, the human body loses water rapidly through heavy breathing and dry air. Climbers typically need 4 to 6 liters of fluid daily, along with 5,000 to 6,000 calories, just to keep their bodies functioning. Dehydration above 26,000 feet thickens the blood, reduces oxygen transport, and impairs cognition, compounding the dangers of altitude. Medical teams at base camp had stressed strict hydration and nutrition, warm liquids every 30 minutes, high-calorie foods every hour, and avoiding low-altitude strategies were essential. Escolastico dismissed these warnings, believing her own mountain optimization protocol could handle the stress. She practiced strategic dehydration to train her kidneys and intermittent fasting to improve fat-burning efficiency, ignoring her guide's advice. It was wild to think someone could be so confident in their methods that they ignored experts. I kept imagining how tempting it would be to feel smarter than everyone else, even when your life is on the line. From Camp 4, she immediately deviated from standard hydration practices. She drank little, claiming her body was adapted for efficiency. Warm tea and soup were declined because they didn't fit her self-imposed precision nutrition schedule. By morning near 27,000 feet, warning signs were clear. Her speech slurred, coordination faltered, and urine output dropped to almost nothing. She was showing early dehydration despite the cold. Seeing someone ignore these signs made it clear how easy it is to misread your own body. I pictured myself stumbling, thinking everything was fine, not realizing the danger. Her guide pressed her to drink, but she insisted her body was accessing stored hydration, and that stopping her protocol would hurt performance. As they climbed, her blood thickened, reducing oxygen flow to her brain and muscles. She stumbled frequently and showed confusion, but remained determined to follow her plan. By 28,000 feet, dehydration-induced altitude sickness became severe. Her heart raced, skin lost elasticity, and she experienced disorientation. She finally drank, but her body could not process fluids at that altitude, and the damage was irreversible. I couldn't help but feel scared seeing how stubborn decisions could pile up, one after another, pushing someone past the point of no return. During the final push to the summit, her severely dehydrated body gave out. She collapsed, unable to stay upright on the icy slope. Her guide quickly secured her with a safety rope and began emergency rehydration, giving small sips of electrolyte solution while monitoring her pulse and breathing. He radioed base camp for urgent evacuation, explaining her critical condition. Despite these efforts, her body continued to weaken. Her movements were sluggish, her skin pale and dry, and she became increasingly disoriented. The extreme altitude amplified the effects of dehydration, making the descent a struggle for both her and the guide. Even with help from team members, the prolonged lack of fluids had caused irreversible damage. She died at 28,400 feet from severe dehydration, acute mountain sickness, and cardiovascular failure. The coroner found her blood dangerously concentrated, essentially turning her circulatory system into sludge. Her water bottles were nearly full, proving she had deliberately avoided proper hydration. The incident was widely reported in wellness publications as a cautionary tale about applying unproven theories in extreme environments. Reading her story, it struck me how easy it is to trust ideas that feel good but aren't safe. I pictured myself in her shoes, seeing confidence turn into danger when basic survival rules are ignored. Her final social media post, published after her death, promoted listening to your body's wisdom, advice that could have saved her. Escolastico's story shows that at extreme altitude, proper hydration, oxygen, and nutrition are critical, and ignoring them can be fatal. It was November 3rd, 2013, on the north face of Mount Everest during the late autumn season. Snow whipped across the mountain, cutting visibility to just a few feet. Only the most experienced teams remained as winter conditions began setting in. Leanda Barunga, 41, a fitness entrepreneur from Miami Beach, had built her career on high-intensity training and motivational content about pushing limits. She had summited several major peaks solo and prided herself on her independence. Everest was meant to be the culmination of her climbing career, proving that her mental toughness methodology could conquer any challenge. Above 26,000 feet, navigation depends on following established routes marked by fixed ropes and anchor points. Weather can change in seconds, turning a simple path into a deadly cliff. Guides rely on GPS, rope systems, and landmarks to keep climbers safe, especially in low visibility zones. I kept thinking about how easy it would be for me to get disoriented up there, even if I thought I knew the route. One wrong step in that whiteout could be fatal. Base camp had issued repeated warnings about the worsening weather and stressed the importance of staying in sight of assigned guides. Radio check-ins every 15 minutes were mandatory to ensure no one became separated from the group. Barunga had clashed with her guide throughout the expedition, criticizing his slow pace and insisting her fitness and experience allowed her to move independently. Despite repeated warnings, she pressed ahead whenever possible, convinced she could navigate on her own. During the summit attempt, visibility dropped below 10 feet as blowing snow and thick clouds turned the mountain into a uniform wall of white. The team moved carefully, using fixed ropes and staying within sight of each other. But Barunga grew frustrated with each pause, seeing safety measures as unnecessary delays. At a critical transition between two fixed-line sections, she chose to move ahead alone rather than wait for her guide to complete safety checks. I kept imagining myself in that situation, thinking I could handle it on my own, and how quickly confidence could turn into real danger. Confident in her memory and navigation skills, she ignored calls to halt and pressed forward. Within minutes, she lost sight of the team and the fixed ropes. Her radio calls grew increasingly urgent as she realized she could no longer identify landmarks or follow the established path. The extreme cold soon took a serious toll. Her GPS failed in the freezing temperatures, leaving her without a reliable way to navigate. She tried retracing her steps, but the endless white landscape offered no clear points of reference. Snow drifted over tracks, and the uniform terrain made it impossible to judge distance or direction. Her guide's radio calls went unanswered as she pressed forward, relying on failing memory and instinct. As hours passed, the weather worsened with strong winds and blowing snow, reducing visibility to near zero. Barunga unknowingly entered a high-risk avalanche zone. Hypothermia drained her strength, and altitude sickness clouded her judgment. Her calls for help grew weaker, movement slowed, and the mountain's dangers closed in, turning the climb into a desperate struggle for survival. Search teams found her body 4 days later, nearly a mile off the main route. She had spent over 18 hours in the death zone, succumbing to exposure and exhaustion. Her equipment was scattered, showing she had tried to signal for help. I couldn't stop thinking about how one small mistake can get you completely turned around, and how being stubborn alone on the mountain can quickly become dangerous. The coroner confirmed death from severe hypothermia and exhaustion, with contributing factors including altitude sickness and dehydration. Her final coordinates showed she had been moving in circles, unable to find the main route. The incident underscored the importance of maintaining team cohesion in extreme conditions. Personal strength and determination could not replace teamwork and adherence to proven safety protocols. Fitness industry publications covered the tragedy, noting the fatal consequences of ignoring guidance in extreme environments. Following the incident, her motivational brand quietly disappeared from social media. The mountain had claimed another climber who believed personal excellence could substitute for collaboration, patience, and strict adherence to survival strategies.